Welcome to episode 120 of the Forward for 50 podcast, where we interview people over 50 pursuing new direction for their lives. It's an opportunity for men and women to tell their stories their way and in their own words. I'm Greg Gerber, the founder of Forward from 50 and your host for today's show. Today I'm privileged to speak with Tom Smith, a man whose life took an unexpected and remarkable turn after he entered his seventh decade. A lifelong skeptic, Tom spent his career rising through the ranks of retail management and leadership training, never giving much thought to spiritual matters. That's until a series of surprising experiences led him to a profound faith journey at the age of 60. Now 72, Tom is on a mission to help others discover that it's never too late to find meaning, purpose, and even start a relationship with Jesus. In this episode, Tom shares how his journey unfolded from moving back to Arizona for reasons he didn't fully understand, to developing an unlikely friendship with his future pastor, to having deep daily commutes with Jesus that completely reshaped his outlook. He also discusses how a simple prompting to help a homeless man named Jacob became a life-affirming sign that there really are no coincidences. Now the author of a new book, From Skeptic to Salvation, Tom is determined to share his story and encourage others to embrace the possibility of transformation no matter what their age. To tell us more about what gives his life meaning and purpose in his 70s, please welcome Tom Smith to the show. Thanks for joining me today, Tom. I really appreciate your time. Now, I understand you no longer believe in coincidences. Is that true?
Yes, that is true. My life used to be that everything just was happenstance, coincidence, and that there was really no grand scheme to things, why things happened. And fairly recently, I was proven wrong about that, and that there is no such thing as coincidences. Everything is part of a master scheme of things that's driven by God and Jesus. And I was fortunate to be able to personally experience that.
I can imagine. What did you do for a living before you retired?
We share something in common. We both got degrees in police science. And I wanted to be a cop. I wanted to be a chief of police. And so I went to NAU and got my degree in police administration and went through, this was over a year's worth of testing with the Department of Public Safety. And so I wanted to be with the state police. And I was in the final 60 out of 2,000 applicants, and I got bounced out because of a back x-ray. They said, but it was during the affirmative action years, and they said off the record, the reason that we had to eliminate you from the upcoming academy is because you're white and your last name's Smith. If you had a Spanish surname or you were female, then we could meet our government or federal funding requirements. That's what I wanted to be. And that was a blessing that I didn't go down that path. But I ended up getting into retail because a best friend of mine got me into selling water beds. And I took to it. I never thought I'd ever be a salesman because I had a stigma. I had a negative connotation about what sales was all about. But I ended up staying with that company for 17 years. And rose up through the ranks and ended up being a director responsible for about 25% of the country's showrooms, retail stores. And as we transformed from water beds, I got into a company that sold sleep number beds. And I was basically a sales trainer and leadership development, a trainer for many years. So I converted from being a introverted, shy guy to being a sales trainer. So that's what I did most of my years. Even though a test that I took in junior high said I'd be most likely suited to be a forest ranger.
So did I. That is too funny. They must have had a rush on needing forest rangers at that time.
Yeah, that's where they put people that don't feel comfortable around other people.
That's probably right. Or don't play well with other people. That's
right, exactly.
Yeah. Where are you from?
I consider home Tucson, but I grew up in a military family, so we moved every 3 years. We were like migrant workers, but my father was in the Air Force, and so we rotated every 3 years, which that was a tough one as a kid because you're always making friends and then leaving friends and then making friends and leaving friends. But I found out that even that was a blessing because in my adult life, I relocated from one market to another. So it had prepared me for the ability to transition and make new friends, establish yourself in a new environment more effectively.
I would imagine you have friends all over the world now.
I don't.
Oh, okay.
Because most of my friends are here in the US because I was a kid back then, elementary school, junior high. Once I got into high school, it became a bit more stable. And as far as where I live, so it spent many years in Tucson, and then in my career, established friends in the different markets who are lifelong friends today. But yeah, we lived in Germany for 3 years, and there's a couple people that are still, I stay loosely connected to, where we share that similar background.
One of the things about your story is that you came to faith rather late in life and really late in life.
Very late. And it's kind of like one of those things, not as close as the criminal hanging next to Jesus on the cross, and where he said, wow, that was a close one.
Yes.
Waiting a little too late. But yes, I was 60 when I came to Jesus, or when he found me as a good shepherd looking for his lost sheep. I was definitely lost. And so I'm now 72. So this whole experience has been 12 years, and that's relatively new, considered newbie in my spiritual walk.
What prompted this decision to start exploring your curiosity about faith?
It wasn't a decision. That's the remarkable thing. If it had been up to me, I'd still be wandering around out there aimlessly without spiritual foundation. And that's the essence of the book, is that just these spiritual encounters, these promptings to do things or take action that I normally wouldn't have done, led us from living in California, coming back to Arizona for just a feeling. We left our kids in California and just uncharacteristically came out to Arizona, like the Beverly Hillbillies, but in reverse, of California to Arizona, and wondering, why are we doing this? And I sold my business in California just spontaneously. And my wife, Karen's an RN. She was able to take a job in Arizona, but home was Arizona. So we were coming back home. So we had that feeling that for that reason. But I had a stronger purpose, and that's to reunite family. And I had not been connected to my family because of working out in the hinterlands and rarely being able to get home for the holidays, because in retail, you are all hands on deck during the holidays. And so my family needed me after many years of not being available to them. So that was the driving force. But like I say, when I moved back to Arizona, I ended up moving next door to Brad and Elfie. And Brad, turns out, was going to be my future pastor. I didn't know it at the time, but I moved into what I refer to as a Copper Hills Church sandwich. I had Brad and Elfie on one side, and then two friends of ours that went to Copper Hills for an extended period of time, Tom and Pat, were on the other side of me. So Jesus had put me in an environment that I had no option but feel his presence.
I can imagine. What do you think was behind your initial skepticism?
I guess some people might consider me somewhat of a quirky kind of guy. My humor is a little off center, and I didn't consider myself skeptical. I thought that's what everybody felt, but I think I was jaded by the persona of the Jimmy and Tammy Faye Baker crowd and the wealth pastors who are preaching, pontificating something, and they're wearing $5,000 suits and have multiple mansions and driving Rolls Royce. I was just somewhat jaded about that. And I think a lot of people are. They get their perception of religion about who they see and who they're exposed to. And so I was skeptical there, but I just was always nervous around church people. I don't know why that was, but in the book, in the introduction, I said that I suffered from some social anxiety, and I believe that Satan used that to his advantage to keep me polarized from a relationship with Jesus. And it wasn't until I met Brad, and Brad's messages each Sunday is not about religion, but it's about a relationship with Jesus. And I was going to Copper Hills Church for some time, and I was doing what I thought was everything was right, because I think a lot of Christians do that. They said, okay, this is what we need to do. We're going to go to church every Sunday. We're going to serve at church. We're going to attend small group meetings and do all of that. And I was doing that. I said, okay, I got all the bases covered. Until one Sunday, one of his messages resonated with me, and that's about having a relationship with Jesus. That concept never even occurred to me. Well, plus, how do you have a relationship with somebody you can't see, or an entity that you can't hear or see? So it was like having an imaginary friend. I said, I never had an imaginary friend when I was a kid, but a lot of kids did. And anyway, he basically, he told a story about going out to the park and having a conversation with Jesus, and right out loud. And people were walking by and they can hear him, and they're thinking he's some kind of psycho sitting at a park bench and just eating lunch and talking to having a conversation with the voices in his head. But he said that it was very rewarding for him. And so at the end of that talk, he suggested that everybody in attendance that day, that week, that they commit to having lunch with Jesus. So just go out, have lunch, have a conversation. I worked every day in a small retail environment, and I couldn't do that. So one thing led to another. So I had an epiphany. Why not have my 45-minute commute to work be a commute with Jesus? And that's how my conversations with him and my relationship with him began. And so 5 days a week, 45 minutes on my drive to work. As soon as I got in the car, I'd start chatting with him. And it was amazing, because then I realized, isn't that how relationships begin anyway? Even with amongst us, we get together, we have a conversation, we get to know about each other, and we tell each other about what's going on in our minds. And so that's how the initial relationship began.
Okay. That's a very interesting story, but you're right. You can't have that relationship without having that contact. And the problem with a lot of Christians and early Christians is that they think the relationship involves always talking to Jesus, but never pausing long enough to hear his response back. How do you do that?
This is interesting. I didn't catch myself. He made me aware that I was doing all the talking, blah, 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 for 45 minutes. I thought only women, I shouldn't say that. That's not socially correct. But anyway, men typically don't have that much to say where you can talk endlessly for 45 minutes. And my wife and her friends, they can chat about anything for hours. But so I was on my way to work, and I was having that conversation, and I hear this voice in my head, be quiet. And it just struck me, and I had this prompting, you know what? I'm doing all the talking. And what does that feel like when you're with somebody and they're doing all the talking? You don't feel important. You can't get in a word in edgewise, and at some point you just don't want to be with that person. So that was an epiphany, or a prompting that he gave me, that this sometimes having a relationship is just being quiet and letting those messages come through from him. And so I learned a ton there. But yes, it's to hear his voice, which I've heard multiple times, and some in a more corrective fashion, was just really unsettling at first, but reassuring on a different level. Yeah, that I will always remember that. I made reference to that in the book also. That was the first time that I heard his voice. Basically told me to shut up and let him have a
Let him
little
have a
bit.
word in. Yes, that is great. A lot of people think that the voice of Jesus is going to be condemning and always telling you that you're doing things wrong. But I've not found that to be the case. Most times, Jesus is more corrective in his nature. It's like the voice inside of you is saying you really screwed up now. There's no hope for you. You blew it. It's not going to be recovered, etc. And Jesus says, I think you could have taken a different approach on this. Let's talk about that and do it
Exactly.
that way. And when people can start to understand that kind of voice and listen for that, it's a game changer.
It really is. And, that this book, the whole story is, this is not anything I set out to be involved in. It's not anything that I thought I would ever do, but it's a kind of a blueprint that I'm hoping that other individuals who may be able to relate to my mindset, to where I'm at, and it doesn't have to be late in life, but relating to someone that, okay, I've been down the road a ways and things can still change significantly for you. It's never too late, as I guess it is if you die and you haven't made that decision to turn your life over to him. But this book is somewhat of a template of my journey and how that can work and will work if you allow yourself that opportunity to let him work within you.
It's modern technology today makes it easier for us to talk to ourselves in our car and even to sit on a park bench. All we have to do is pop in an earbud and people think you're having a conversation with somebody.
That's right.
And they don't think you're weird anymore.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I remember the first time, and this is years ago, cell phones were just making its presence, and I still had a pager, and I thought I was a hot shot, like a doctor had a pager. When your pager went off, you were an important person. But the cell phones started coming out, and I remember going into a restroom in a Radisson hotel or something of that nature. They have multiple stalls and whatever. And so I went in there to wash my hands, and I just remember this voice coming out of the stall. It's just like the person's having a conversation. I said, what's wrong? What's wrong with this person? Not figuring out that he's on a cell phone, because it was just like not that many people had cell phones at that time. And I was just kind of taken back by there's some madman in the stall there talking to himself.
That's right. How do you
So
maintain your attention when you're having that conversation with Jesus? I would think that when you're in a car, there's so many distractions around there that would break that connection and cause your mind to wander. How would you keep it focused on him?
that's the scary part. Once I got to work, I didn't even remember my commute. Because I had so much I wanted to say. And because I think so many years of not having that relationship, I had so much just to get off my shoulder and so many questions about what I had heard at the last Sunday presentation by Brad in the last sermon. So I would ask about those questions. And I was immersing myself into books that created more questions than answered. And I remember one series of books, Journey of Souls, Destiny of Souls, and written by the author was the name is escaping me now, but he is a hypnotherapist, and he would deep regression hypnosis and take people back to times where they had a previous life. And so I was asking him about that reincarnation thing that this person was promoting. And so I'd get really deep into that, or different stories of the Bible, and I would be asking questions like that. So I didn't find it difficult to maintain attention at all, because I was just so new to it and I'm so drawn in that and just inspired by what was happening. And so he's actually the one that maintained my attention.
Okay, that's good to note. He's also talked to you in a number of ways. Once you could determine his voice and discern it, even through all the noise, etc., he started telling you to do specific things, like put him to work to a homeless man. Tell us about that.
Yeah, that's okay. So on my way to work, I was having a conversation about a sermon that Brad had. I take that back. It wasn't a sermon. It was a YouTube video that Stephen Furtick, one of the founders of Elevation Church in North Carolina, I believe it is. Anyway, he was doing a talk on Jacob. And so on my way to work, I had some questions about his talk. And once I got to work, after having that conversation with Jesus and confused about some of the messages or metaphors in the story, I got to work, and I had a coworker who's also a Christian. And that was already there. And so my routine was to go in the office, get it prepared for business, and because a small retail operation. So part of the routine is take the trash out back. So I did that, empty some trash into the dumpster, and then came back in, got another load of trash. And on the way out, I noticed that I was reminded I had this huge stack of cardboard that needed to be broken down, cut down so the recyclers could come and take it. And on my second trip out there, I noticed that someone had appeared sitting on that pile of cardboard. And I looked at him at the corner of my eyes, and he was looking at me, thinking that I was going to shoo him away because he was an obvious homeless person. And we had quite a few that would wander through the alley during the course of the day and night. And so I didn't say anything. So once I dumped the trash, I just kind of looked over and said, "Hi, how you doing?" And he cautiously looked at me and he says, "Oh, okay." And I said, "Great." And I walked into the store. And as I did, a voice told me, "Put him to work." And it just flashed. And I said, "Okay." So I went back out and I said, "How would you like to earn some extra money?" And he just like, "Okay." And I said, "I need this cardboard cut down and stacked so that the recyclers will take it tomorrow." And he said, "Are you willing to do that?" And he said, "Absolutely." So gets up, takes out a pocket knife, and he starts getting to work. Went back into the store, and I had that voice told me, "Make him a cup of coffee." So I got the Keurig, made him a cup of coffee and brought it out. And I said, "Would you like a cup of coffee?" And he just, "Oh, yes, thank you." So I handed him the cup of coffee with my left hand, I remember, and he looked at me and he had these blue eyes, just crystal clear blue eyes. And he holds his right hand out and shook my hand. He says, "My name is Jacob." And it just, okay, all right. So there's a lot of people named Jacob, but not that many people. And the coincidence is, okay, I can't believe this is a coincidence because we're not supposed to believe in coincidences. But having questions about Jacob and then arriving at the store and encountering a homeless person that just suddenly appears on a stack of cardboard that I wanted to have cut down, and his name happens to be Jacob, didn't answer a lot of questions except presence, Jesus. He says, "Okay, I'm with you, and here's some evidence that I'm with you." And wouldn't you know that Jacob did the most, I thought maybe just tear some cardboard and stack it up. But this guy, he did it so precise that they just took pride in his work. And it's just kind of like, how would you, if Jesus was going to present you with someone to do a job, you probably would imagine that he's going to present you with a person that's going to do it just in a perfect manner. And after he was finished, I gave him some money, gave him a $20 bill for a half hour's work or whatever. And I said, "Thank you, Jacob. I appreciate it." And he went in his backpack and he pulled out a piece of paper and wrote his name on it with a phone number. And he said, "If you ever need anything else, please give me a call." And in the book I wrote, I said, I wonder why I never took him up on that offer, because I think I didn't want a bubble burst and thinking that this was not what it was I'm thinking it was.
Mm-hmm.
So I never did call him back, and I regret that at this point. But
Okay. That's a really cool story because when we ask Jesus a question, he will always respond. We just have to listen to it. I read a book once where somebody would ask Jesus to be a part of a miracle. Next thing he's encountering stranded motorist or something like that, somebody who needs help. And Jesus loves it when we respond to those promptings because then he can give us another one.
all along in this story, it became apparent that he was building a high level of faith in me, of his presence in my life. Because really I think doubt is something that creeps into everyone's minds. Even Christians that have been Christians for many years will have this little bit of doubt. And he created a scenario where that doubt was removed permanently. And if you read that part about "In God We Trust," where I was finding money, I was doing a lot of walking And during my walks, I would have those conversations with Jesus. In lieu of a commute to work, I would have a walk with Jesus. And so it's a long story, but basically during my walks, I was prompted to engage in a back and forth activity with him in which I would mention that it would be awesome if I found some coins. And then minutes later, I'd find a little group of coins. And then I'd go out on another walk and I say, it'd be cool if I found a nickel. And then I'd find a nickel. That's it. And then the next time, how about a dime? And I'm going up on playing this gradually increasing denomination of coins. Okay. So I find a dime, a beat up dime. And I said, okay, I'm going to raise the bar. I said, finding these coins is great, Jesus, but I might be pushing the envelope here, but how about a quarter? And anybody can find a quarter on the ground, right? But he leads me down a path that goes through a neighborhood where houses are built on desert properties. It's just desert. And I said, I'm not going to find any money here, much less a quarter. So I'm going down the road, and then I have these promptings. And this is how he always speaks to me, is these strong promptings. And I have this prompting in my head, turn your head to the left. And he directed my eyes to an area in the desert and focused on this little round sphere-shaped object. And I looked at it, and it looked like an old bottle cap. It was partially buried in the dirt. So I walk up to it, and I take a close look and bend down and pick it up, and it's a quarter in the middle of the desert. And I said, so his way, he could have showed me a quarter anywhere in the Fry's parking lot or wherever, but he chose to do it in a manner that would dismiss any possibility that this was a coincidence and that there's nothing to it. And said that really was a game changer for me as far as proving that the Holy Spirit resides within me. He's with me. And I said, wow, that was a remarkable event.
I think Jesus is really playful, to be honest. And so this was an opportunity for him to have some fun with you as well. And the fact that it was a specific answer to the prayer, it's like he didn't just show you a dime when you asked for a quarter. You asked for a quarter and he showed you a quarter. And it was like, wow, that's pretty impressive.
Greg, the interesting thing here too is I never found anything if I was purposely looking for it. Never. Okay. I never found anything because sometimes I was tempted to go out and find something. Never show it to me unless I just release control. We all know that faith is we just let God take control of our lives and let him take the wheel. Okay. Carrie Underwood song, Jesus Take the Wheel. And so whenever I let that happen and allowed him to do the directing, that's when I made the discoveries. Never when I tried to take control and seek it out myself.
I interviewed somebody a couple of years ago who told me that he would ask Jesus to show him heart rocks because that was like a little love tap or something like that. That he was a communication way that he was reminded that Jesus loved him. So he'd be out hiking and his eyes would wander somewhere. And right in the middle of where he was wandering, there'd be a heart-shaped rock. He collected buckets full of heart-shaped rocks as signs from Jesus that he was loved.
That's interesting because you attend the same Bible study I do in the morning, the men's Bible study. Remember when Tony introduced us to the pocket Jesus? And so this little 1-inch high Jesus, and on the sash it says, Jesus loves you. And so it's interesting that people were finding those out in hiking trails. My brother found one in the parking lot of the church, and he didn't even know about these things. So he took it and kept it with him. And so it's been a great way for us to remind ourselves that Jesus is with us, but also as an icebreaker for us to introduce other people to Jesus.
What prompted you to write your book?
I had no intention on writing a book. I had no intention of being an author. That was the last thing I thought I'd ever do. And when I started experiencing these spiritual encounters, which multiple, so many that there was enough there to comprise a broader story and in a book, I was always prompted that this is not just for you, but these were meant to be shared. And I didn't really know what that meant, except tell my life group friends about what's been happening. And they just be deers like blinded in headlights when I tell them these stories. Every week was a new story. And he says, Tom, you're on a roll. I feel like you've got a definite connection going on here. And so I started a year and a half after some of these events occurred. And the events occurred over maybe a year and a half, 2 year span. I was prompted to write them down. And I can't even remember what I did last week, but to be able to recall in vivid detail things that transpired year and a half, 2 years prior showed the significance and the impact that it made in my mind. So I just started documenting it and created a manuscript. And then once I finished documenting all those events, I just archived it and stuck it in a cabinet. I didn't think I was going to do anything with it. And then 2 years later, that thing sat in the cabinet for 2 years. 2 years later, during my volunteering with Joy Bus, which we serve meals, we deliver meals for in-home cancer patients, I met Phyllis. So Phyllis represents a large part of the second part of the book. There's book's two parts. One is chronicling what occurred to me in the spiritual encounters, and the back half is how the book became a book. And Phyllis, I met with her, we developed a friendship, and then in the course of a conversation, we had a God talk, and I told her how I had all these crazy things happen, and I documented them in a manuscript. She said, do you mind if I read it? And I said, geez, this is a train wreck of a manuscript. I didn't write it with expectations anybody else was going to see it, but I gave it to her. And one thing led to another in that she said, do you mind if I edit it? And I said, okay, all right, thank you. And then she just began work on it. And she says, after reading it and doing some editing, she says, Tom, she's on hospice care. So she's in end-stage cancer. And she says, will you promise me something? Promise me that you'll have this book published after I die. And which was a heavy ask and a huge compliment. So basically, I had made a mission that I was going to have it published before she died. So there was a heightened sense of urgency to have it done. And so she and I were cooperating on it. And she is a very good coach, but she is also the impetus for Jesus used to get this out, because this story was meant to be shared. And so it has been. It was published February 11th, so it's been about a couple months maybe. And it's only been distributed through my immediate circle of contacts at church, and now on Barnes & Noble and Amazon. But it's published by Trilogy Christian Publishing, which is a division of the Trinity Broadcasting Network. So
That's neat. How did you find a publisher? You didn't have any experience and you had no track record of books, and
I had it found me.
wow.
So Phyllis's niece, one of her nieces, Phyllis had told her about it, the book. I sent the manuscript to her. She was impressed by the manuscript. A month went by, and then I got an email from her, and she says, Tom, I saw an ad on Trinity Broadcasting Network for Trilogy Christian Publishing, and they help young Christian authors new Christian authors get started towards publishing a book. And she sent me the information. So I said, okay, because I didn't know whether to self-publish, publish. I didn't know anything about it. And so I arranged for a phone interview with one of their agents, and I sent them, they wanted the manuscript sent to them. 2 days later, I got an offer they wanted to work with me.
Wow.
And so then that's, all history at that point. It found me.
Absolutely.
And
It's amazing how God put people in your life at just the right time to help move this project forward.
That is absolutely, and you are even part of that, because having this conversation is just really an unlikely way that we met. It just, people come in our lives that kind of change our trajectory or reinforce where we're going. And I've seen that through the years, but particularly since I've embraced Jesus as my leader, coach, spiritual advisor, just savior. And things just really have taken a direction of its own. So
What's the next step for you? What's still on your bucket list?
I wish I had ended this book to be continued, because this is just the beginning. It's interesting that all this work went into creating a tool. I've been prompted that this is not something that is just going to end up on the shelf. It has made an impact in some people's lives already. And that was the goal, that if it positively led one person to discover a relationship with Jesus, then it was all worthwhile. But this is actually going to be my mission moving forward, is to maximize the potential of this book. That is honoring Jesus the best way that I can, and to use this to help him further his mission. And you just had a guest on the previous podcast who was introducing people to heaven, I think
That's
is
right.
the name. So I listened to that and I said, wow, okay, Jesus is employing a lot of different people to accomplish this purpose, different ways to go about it. And I said, this is great. So I feel so blessed to be a person that he had sought out. Just unlikely. I thought I would be one of the most unlikely people to do this. I didn't even like English in school. I wrote a lot of memos in business, and that was about the extent of it. But I will be using this as a tool. I'll be seeking out groups that I can speak to about this. I just did a book reading at the church, which you got to experience, and that was just the beginning of it. I have a website that's in its infancy, which is www.fromskeptictosalvation.com. So I'm just getting that started. And so some social media, but I know nothing about this stuff. I'm sure he's going to put people in my path to help me along with that.
If you could turn the clock back, is there anything you'd do differently in your life or in this project?
If I were to do anything differently, I wouldn't be here right now.
Correct.
I think, do I have some regrets? I said, okay, maybe I have regrets, but you know what? Everything was done or had a purpose to it. So I can't in good conscience say I have any regrets. I think I can't take credit for this book. This book the events were created by Jesus. The prompting was created by Jesus. I was an unwilling author, or a reluctant author. He drugged me through the muck to get it done. The credit I will give myself is I was obedient. I followed his lead, and I had faith that I was he gave me this feeling that this is what I needed to do. So I'll give myself that credit, that
You were obedient.
an obedient servant. So I plan on using this as a tool and maximizing the scope of it as best that I can. So,
do you have any advice for people over 50 who may be wondering what they can do to get more meaning and purpose in their lives?
I do.
Okay.
I do. And everybody that you talk to has got something in common. They're wondering what they're going to do in the latter half of their life. I look at my life as a gas gauge in a car. When you fill up the tank and you're just fairly new in life, that tank of gas seems to last forever, that first half. But once it gets to the halfway point, things seem to drop rather quick. And so you start wondering, oh man, I got to get on the stick here because I don't have that much time left. And really, I want to be relevant. And I remember a customer of mine, and when I was in the stores and we catered to seniors, he says, I got one piece of advice for you. And he was retired, and I was thinking about retiring. And he says, make sure you're always relevant. Make sure when you wake up in the morning that you have a purpose and that you feel relevant. And that resonated with me for so long. And I really didn't know what that meant at the time because I was in the workplace. But I started thinking about it and I said, that is absolutely true. Fortunate for me, while I was working, I was attending church and I was volunteering and I was interacting with a lot of different people and serving, and I was involved in Bible study. So once I retired, I was able to just transition to that. And so I really had a lot to do, a lot to focus on, and I developed a lot of relationships. So the big piece of advice that I have is try not to get into a position where you isolate yourself. Accelerate your opportunities to be relational with other people, and because they will provide value. And God has always intended us to be in relationships and to be able to use each other as support for each other. And I found that to be just a huge value. And I have an abundance of friends that are supportive, and that's really energizing. So I can see if I had allowed myself to unplug from work and say I'm retired, then my brain unplugs. So I see retirement as many of your guests see it as, I see it as I don't have to do what I'm doing. I can choose what I do is I'm doing it because I want to, not because I have to. And that's a total mind shift.
Yep.
And it's really energizing.
That's great. How can people connect with you if they would like to ask you a question or to follow?
Well, I have an email address, which would be Tom at fromskeptic2salvation.com. And they go onto the website, which is fromskeptic2salvation.com, and connect through Facebook or Instagram, that type of thing. But the email, Tom at fromskeptic2salvation.com, is the best way.
Are you active on any social media channels?
I'm horrible at being active on social media, but if you're not active, then you're dead in the water these days. So I'm working at being better. There's some Facebook. I'm on LinkedIn and Instagram now, and I'm working to be better or more mindful at staying active on that. So I think that's a generational thing too. When you got somebody in their 70s, that suddenly you better get with it on social media, then because that's how you survive and that's how you really get your message out. Then I'm learning really quick.
Thank you for sharing your story with me today, Tom. It was a pleasure hearing it, and I'm sure others are going to find it inspiring as well, especially those people who are skeptics yet and still don't know what to go, but they suspect that God might be real, but they really don't know for sure. They should be reading your book.
Thank you very much. And thank you for making the time, Greg. Appreciate it.
Tom Smith's Life After 50 is a powerful example of what can happen when someone opens their heart to something bigger than themselves. After decades of living with what he now calls a happenstance mindset, Tom found himself nudged repeatedly and uncomfortably towards something more intentional and divine. At 60, he began to believe that everything, even seemingly random events, might actually be part of a greater plan. That belief was solidified through what Tom describes as a series of spiritual encounters. One of the most memorable occurred when he greeted a homeless man who was sitting on a pile of cardboard outside his workplace. After a voice prompted Tom to put him to work, he offered the man a small job. As the man stood to accept a cup of coffee, he introduced himself with one simple but chilling word: Jacob. It was the very name Tom had been wrestling with in prayer earlier that morning. Experiences like that had become a turning point. Tom began speaking to Jesus during his long commutes, treating the time like a lunch date with a close friend. At first, Tom did all the talking, but over time, he learned to be quiet and to listen. Tom never set out to be an author, but felt led to document his journey not for fame or profit, but because he knew there were others out there just like him, skeptics who were quietly yearning for something more. Publishing From Skeptic to Salvation has given Tom a renewed sense of purpose. He's now exploring speaking opportunities and building a platform to encourage others, especially those in the second half of life, to remain open to faith, relationships, and the possibility that their most important and meaningful work may still lie ahead. Rather than unplugging from life after retirement, Tom dove deeper into his faith community, built friendships through Bible studies and service groups, and leaned into volunteering. His advice for others is to stay engaged, seek connection, and never underestimate the power of obedience to small promptings. Like Tom said, you don't have to figure everything out, just be willing to follow. To connect with Tom, you can visit his website at www.fromskeptictosalvation.com or email him directly at tom@skeptictosalvation.com. He is also active on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram. That's all for this week's show. If you'd like to start living a more meaningful life, I encourage you to download our free guide to finding purpose, which is available at www.forwardfrom50.com. I'll have another inspirational interview on the next episode of the Forward from 50 podcast. Thanks for listening, and if you like this show, please consider leaving a review wherever you download the episodes.